The original Sonic the Hedgehog released in 1991 and was followed by Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in 1992 and Sonic the Hedgehog CD in 1993. So it stands to reason that once again, 1 year later would see the release of the next 2D Sonic the Hedgehog platformer in the form of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. But this time there's a catch. While Sonic 3 did release in 1994, this was only half the story. Quite literally, the game was effectively split in half and turned into 2 separate games. There's a few reasons for the split, mostly due to an overambitious game size, but also hilariously because of a deadline for a McDonald's Happy Meal tie-in, so ultimately the decision was made to release Sonic the Hedgehog 3 in February of 1994, and then Sonic and Knuckles in October of the same year. Fortunately, the successes of the previous games had allowed Sega the leeway required to pull off such a bold strategy, and with some more clever marketing, they were able to use some cool buzzwords to make the game seem a more complete package with lock-on technology, effectively meaning that the Sonic and Knuckles game cartridge had this weird open head wound that you could slot Sonic 3 into in order to play the 2 games back to back as the seamless, if not cumbersomely named, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. So technically this is 2 games we'll be covering in this video, but it's also 1 game. Or both? All I know for sure is that as far as 2D Sonic games go, this is easily my favourite one. As previously stated, the release of this game was weird, but for all intents and purposes it is worth considering the complete Sonic 3 and Knuckles package to be the game as it was more or less intended to exist, with the separate halves of the game being just that. In my opinion, and I think this is a commonly shared one, there isn't much reason to play just Sonic 3 or just Sonic and Knuckles, as opposed to playing the 2 games as intended. Not only does this make the game much longer, the longest of its Mega Drive brethren, but it just adds more stuff to the game. For one, the titular Knuckles becomes playable throughout the entire experience in his own sort of unique campaign, although of course with the Origins Plus versions I recorded my footage on, the entire cast of characters thus far are playable, since you can play as Sonic, Tails, Knuckles and even Amy in any of the 4 games present. But at the time it was a huge deal to be able to play as this brand new character in this game, especially because he got his own unique pathways through levels that he could explore that were off limits to Sonic and Tails, with his story even diverging into its own thing towards the end. Plus, with the patented lock-on technology on the original console, you could insert the game cartridges for Sonic 1 and 2 into Sonic and Knuckles cartridge to get to play as Knuckles in Sonic 2, or to play a near unlimited selection of Sonic 3 special stages in the form of a title named Blue Spheres. Was lock-on technology strictly a gimmick to sell a product like the blast processing claims were? Not really, it was more like a necessity to be able to make the game bigger and better, while also adhering to deadlines. They just slapped a catchy name onto it to make it seem like it'd be the future, but since then, no other lock-on technology games ever came to be, and no games other than Sonic 1, 2 and 3 ever worked with it, even other Mega Drive Sonic spin-offs like Sonic Spinball. I think the catchy name is certainly the gimmicky part of an otherwise neat way to make a bigger game. With both halves put together, it presented the most content-rich Sonic game ever to that point, and one that was able to learn from the mistakes of its forebearers. The lackluster level design of Sonic 1, the frustrating finale to Sonic 2, and the gimmick-laden structure of Sonic CD all cast aside in favour of making a game that would serve, throughout all 14 of its stages, as a high-octane and exciting Sonic game. In my previous coverage of Sonic the Hedgehog games, I've combined the story and gameplay into a singular larger chapter, since the story was usually just a couple of sentences long. While this time the story does have a little bit more going on. Don't get me wrong, it is by no means a Mass Effect length tale with complex twists and turns. It's still told primarily through animated 16-bit sprite work, there's just a bit more to it. We open to Sonic and Tails flying the tornado across the sea towards Angel Island. Normally, Angel Island is a flying island that hovers miles in the air suspended by a powerful gemstone known as the Master Emerald. Following the destruction of the Death Egg in Sonic 2, its wreckage crash-landed on Angel Island and knocked it down into the sea below. Now being at roughly sea level, Eggman begins his invasion of the island using his classic technique of putting animals into machines. Unfortunately, this island has a protector known as Knuckles the Echidna, which, if you don't know, is like the Australian ecosystem's interpretation of a hedgehog if it laid eggs. Knuckles, not being the sharpest tool in the shed and lacking some key social skills, is convinced by Eggman's tall tale that he is simply a kind-hearted scientist investigating the wreckage, and that Sonic will be coming to steal the Master Emerald. Unsurprisingly, Eggman is in fact the one seeking the emerald, but his lies lead to a confrontation between Knuckles and Sonic, wherein the Chaos Emeralds are straight up knocked out of Sonic and are scattered across the island by Knuckles. Throughout the game, Sonic chases after Eggman, but is usually caught in some kind of trap set up by Knuckles to send him off in a different direction or to put him into more dangerous situations. As he and Tails explore Angel Island, putting a stop to Eggman's plans along the way, they are able to gather the Chaos Emeralds and arrive at the launch site of the repaired Death Egg, stopping Eggman's plans to relaunch it, but also causing it to slam straight back down into Angel Island. This is where the original Sonic 3 ends, and the story continues in Sonic and Knuckles as Sonic and Tails once again chase Eggman throughout the island, trying to stop him from reactivating the Death Egg. Along the way, they find a Super Ring, which leads to the Hidden Palace, which is the place on Angel Island where the Master Emerald is kept secure, but also serves as the hub where these giant enhanced versions of the Chaos Emeralds go that are called the Super Emeralds. They sort of exist in a confusing place within the Sonic timeline, as they're technically canon as far as we know, but they never appear outside of this game, so maybe take their existence with a grain of salt. Anyway, the dynamic duo traverse the island throughout a variety of locales, battling Eggman and gathering the Super Emeralds along the way, until they make it to the Hidden Palace proper, wherein they have a confrontation with Knuckles. After his defeat, Eggman's duplicity is revealed, as he steals the Master Emerald and zaps Knuckles for attempting to stop him. Realizing he'd been tricked, Knuckles quickly makes amends with Sonic, and the now dynamic trio make their way to the iconic Sky Sanctuary, where Sonic squares off against yet another robotic copy, this time in the form of Mecha Sonic Mark II. Huge tangent, but if you haven't read the Sonic IDW comics, I strongly recommend checking out Scrapnik Island, as they do some really cool stuff with this guy, but as far as this game is concerned, he's just a cool boss battle for you to deal with. After this, Sonic boards the Death Egg, faces off against a Master Emerald powered robot, and is ultimately successful in destroying the Death Egg once again. However, if the player collected all of the Chaos and or Super Emeralds, they are treated to one final boss fight, where Eggman attempts to fly away with the Master Emerald, causing Sonic to battle him in space, in an epic finale where he defeats Eggman, rescues the Master Emerald, and returns it to Angel Island, which once again takes off into the sky. In Sonic Origins, the story is then capped off with one final animation of Eggman floating off gently into the ocean, being accosted by a wayward Flicky. Knuckles' story then does take place after this, but we'll cover that in the chapter all about Knuckles later on. Like I said, it's not exactly a complex tale by any means, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles has considerably more of a story than its predecessors, and an impressively small amount of it is necessarily conveyed through the manual or the Origins cutscenes. It's largely done organically and impressively through its gameplay and level design, but as much as I love a good story, the main star of the show in Sonic has thus far been the gameplay, so the question is, what's that like? Featuring all the staple mechanics we've come to know and love in these 2D Sonic platformers thus far, such as the spin dash returning, the ring system to make damage recoverable, and the general emphasis on speed, this game is a worthy successor to the games that came before. But at the same time, it adds a lot of mechanics unique to it to help it stand out. I've never much mentioned power-ups in previous videos since I forgot. That's because you only ever really had invincibility, a basic shield, and speed shoes. Now those shields are elemental shields that give Sonic a variety of abilities on double jumping or straight up immunity to drowning or fire depending on the shield. Of course, the more noteworthy aspect of the gameplay has always boiled down to how it interacts with the level design, and the biggest downside of Sonic 1 was that its level design was simply inconsistent at best, while Sonic 2 tapered off towards the end and Sonic CD just had a lot more going on. But I do feel pretty confident saying that out of all 14 stages across both halves of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, there's only really one level I would describe as being especially problematic in its design. We start with Angel Island Zone, which already mixes up the typical grassy hills opening stage by not only adding a more overgrown jungle aesthetic, but dares to burn it all down in the second act to make a level that, while still very much the simplest to play in the game, stands out visually a lot more than other Green Hill adjacent stages did. This is followed up by Hydro City Zone, and if you pronounce it Hydrocity, then you are a charlatan and a fool. This is the water level, and it's the best one, taking that going fast stuff to an extreme in a genuinely sprawling and gigantic level, while Marble Garden is more focused on verticality with an odd gimmick involving these spinning tops, while also having Earthquake shake up the level design as you progress, which makes it pretty interesting. Carnival Night Zone, however, is the problematic level. If you're familiar with this object, then you probably already know about the frustrations this level caused me as a child. You navigate this battle by just holding up or down to make it move further in the relevant direction, but in a game so focused on momentum and with the battle reacting accordingly to the momentum of your jumps, this was just really unintuitive to not only me, but to a lot of other people as well. Outside of the battle, it's also just a level that likes to bounce you around uncontrollably a lot, which is by no means necessarily the greatest sin in the the world, but it only exacerbates the problems of the barrel because it exists as a roadblock in a level that is otherwise just okay. Ice Cap more than makes up for it though, because holy moly, you get to start the level snowboarding down a mountain, while music that may or may not be produced by a certain pop star plays in the background, and then enter a beautiful level that certainly isn't the fastest stage ever, but strikes a good balance between speed and gimmicks, much like Marble Garden. Launch Base I was less keen on, and truthfully I don't remember much about playing it compared to others, which I suppose makes it just forgettable if anything, though that isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just not a level that strikes me as a special one by any means, even though it is where the Sonic 3 half of the tale ends. The second half of the game opens with Mushroom Hill, which is admittedly a bit less exciting than some other stages, as it somewhat resembles another Green Hill-esque area, but this time they load it up with a bunch of gimmicks to make it really stand out. Flying Battery is just so cool to me. This is a level that showed up previously, as it was shown to be what bombed the Angel Island zone at the beginning, so even just conceptually it rocks, and you add the monkey bars and flying off of poles at high speeds, it just adds to the cool factor of this level. Sandopolis is annoying if you want to try and get to a special stage. The first act is just gigantic and requires using tails to fly up to some of the rings, and I guess I feel like sticking so high ended up with me not really seeing a lot of the first act, while the second act is a lot smaller, but utilises these pulleys to stave off ghosts that attack you, as well as relying on this confusingly laid out slide section that kinda just keeps looping you unless you jump off at one of the few correct locations. If you're ignoring the special stages, it's pretty harmless overall. I do think this is a weaker level, though nothing will compare to the Barrel of Doom. Plus, Lava Reef follows it, and that level is one of my personal favourites. I don't know what the community consensus is on it, but I just think it uses its idea well, and I have a fun time playing it, and I don't really have much else to say, it's just a solid level overall and makes great use of that fire shield. Hidden Palace is barely a level. You kinda just walk forwards and do a boss fight before being transported to Sky Sanctuary Zone, where Sonic and Tails chase after the Death Egg as it rises into the sky in the background, fighting against the new Mecha Sonic Mark II, numerous times throughout the level in reruns of older Sonic boss fights, and then finally in a one-on-one fight, and it's just such a great level both visually and in terms of how it utilises the layout and antagonist to provide such a great final sprint towards the finale, which is where Death Egg Zone comes in, which is a very difficult zone that admittedly doesn't let you go as fast as many others, but I never found it to be unfair by any means. It's a fun challenge compared to the previous visit to the Death Egg, and overall I found it a rather enjoyable romp, anti-gravity mechanic and all. The boss fight at the end I was less eager on, as I found it a little slow for the most part, with a second phase that took a little bit of time to really figure out what I was supposed to do. Like, it just felt a bit off at first, you know, but once I understood the rhythm of the second phase, it was pretty simple. I just had to take a few deaths in order to get that understanding. And then provided you have all the Chaos Emeralds or all the Super Emeralds, you get to partake in Doomsday Zone, a fully flying epic chase against Eggman's fleeing ship to take him down and stop his plans once and for all. This level is honestly pretty hard to lose, I feel like, due to the permanent invincibility and free-flying controls, meaning that the only way to fail is by losing all of your rings as they slowly drain out of you. Though even then you can just hold off and gather more rings seemingly indefinitely. It's basically a great little victory lap to really rub it into Eggman's face before the credits roll, and sometimes that's all a secret boss fight needs to be. Which I suppose segues nicely into the fact that, yeah, Super Sonic returns as a playable upgraded version of Sonic for collecting all of the Chaos Emeralds, and you then get the additional upgrade of Hyper Sonic should you collect all the Super Emeralds, who is just a souped up crazy version of Super Sonic that goes even faster and I believe can breathe underwater, which it's weird that Super Sonic can't do that actually. Both sets of emeralds are gained from completing the absolute best special stage the series has had, possibly ever, in the form of Blue Spheres, a faux 3D rotating sphere with these little orbs on it, and you run around gathering the blue ones while avoiding the red ones. This just by itself could be a game, and it actually is in the form of a bonus game called Blue Spheres that was accessible by inserting Sonic 1 into Sonic and Knuckles. I really like these stages as a way to get the emeralds, and I really like the fact that they're just hidden in obscure areas off the beaten path of the level, rather than requiring care to not take damage before finishing stages or going through checkpoints is really liberating. Finding the special stages is like an exciting version of finding the robot transporters in Sonic CD, with the reward being Super Sonic. Overall, the stages are really good, and with each zone now having 2 bosses instead of just the one, I think the pacing remains really good throughout with a lot of variety, a decent challenge, and just honestly being really entertaining even to this day. While this is by no means the last of Sonic's 2D games, there's other titles such as the Advanced Trilogy, the Rush games, DS versions of Colors and Generations, or the more Genesis faithful titles of Sonic Mania and arguably Sonic Superstars have managed to keep Sonic alive in the second dimension to this day. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is a very consistent game, and one made with a lot of love and care. It oozes personality, and in every aspect of this game, I just had a great time, from its story, to its gameplay, and to its music. I have got to talk to you about Michael Jackson. The famous pop culture icon behind beloved musical numbers such as Thriller, Bad, Billie Jean, and so many more, may or may not have been involved somewhat in the production of the music for Sonic 3. Possibly. I mean, it's almost guaranteed, but like, technically, as far as I know, we've never had any explicit confirmation from Sega or the Michael Jackson estate, one way or the other, that the songs featured in the game are the ones by Michael Jackson. One of the composers for the game said Jackson worked on it, but we don't know to what extent. What we do know is that 4 songs in the original Mega Drive release of Sonic the Hedgehog 3, namely Carnival Night Zone, Ice Cap Zone, Launch Base Zone, and the boss battle music, were all removed from future ports and remasters of the game, including Sonic Origins that I played the game on to record my footage. These are very likely the songs that Michael Jackson had some amount of hand in, as their removal implies that Sega only has tenuous copyright claims to these songs. They also unfortunately happen to be some of the finest songs in the game. Using a mod, I was able to get the original music back into the Origins version of the game, and I recommend you do so as well should you want to play the game, because they really are that good. Which, yeah, that's really all I wanted to say. I just wanted to talk about the weird Michael Jackson situation, and give a nod to the fact that, yes, in this instance, I do concede that the Origins version has a pretty glaring issue that makes it inferior to the original, but at least it can be fixed relatively harmlessly on PC, and, you know, the game is widescreen and easy to access, which I do still appreciate. Taking place chronologically after Sonic and Tails romp through Angel Island is a campaign featuring Knuckles. He glides, he punches, and he accesses different routes and various levels that Sonic never does. That said, the campaign really isn't all that different. You still visit the same levels, bar the final 2 being omitted, and instead of facing off against Eggman, you end up primarily facing off against Egg Robo, a robotic doppelganger of Eggman that on the surface appears to be trying to replicate its creator's original plans of using the Master Emerald for nefarious purposes. As its sole protector, Knuckles attempts to protect Angel Island from the robot, running a similar course to Sonic and similarly gathering the Chaos and Super Emeralds in order to transform into Super and Hyper Knuckles, who are both pink. Hidden Palace Zone is where it diverges a lot, which is somehow even shorter for Knuckles, and then to the similarly shorter Sky Sanctuary Zone, wherein Knuckles has a showdown with the true mastermind behind the second assault on Angel Island, Mecha Sonic Mark II, who even uses the power of the Master Emerald to gain a super form of his own. Overall, it's not the most mind-blowing thing ever, but it's different and it is canon. With Sonic Origins Plus, Knuckles is also playable in the other games on the collection. You can also play this game as a solo Tails or as Amy, though their playthroughs will basically be identical to Sonic's and won't have any overarching differences like Knuckles had. To be honest, I just wanted to call a chapter "and Knuckles," and I think that justifies itself, really. With Sonic 3 and Knuckles now behind us, that concludes the Sonic Origins collection. Sort of. The Plus version of the collection also features a variety of handheld games of varying quality. Some of these were 8-bit variations of the main platforming games, some are 8-bit variations of several spin-offs, and others were wholly unique games like Sonic's first racing game or the first and surprisingly only Tails-centric games to date. Sonic actually had a lot of spin-off games in this time. Sonic Spinball, Knuckles Chaotix, and the Saturn version of Sonic 3D Blast are probably the ones most worth checking out if you want some more old-school Sonic fun, but there are plenty of stinkers to avoid like Sonic Labyrinth. What is perhaps most surprising, however, is that even as Sega released their next console, the Sega Saturn, Sonic was largely absent from it in its entirety. He got a racing game called Sonic R and a games collection called Sonic Jam, but for the most part he ended up being abandoned by Sega in favour of fighting games and other titles, such as Sonic Team focusing on creating Nights into Dreams, which is a whole bizarre can of worms I don't feel qualified to talk about because it is shockingly complex. That's not to say they didn't try, as there were numerous attempts to create something called Sonic Extreme with a cool X on this platform, but it ran into numerous developmental issues that ultimately led to the project being canned, with many people at Sega viewing it as a mercy killing for a product that was doomed to fail. Instead, Sonic's next mainline title after 3 and Knuckles would end up releasing about 4 years later on a different newer console called the Sega Dreamcast. That game, Sonic Adventure, would be fully 3D with voice acting, an open hub world area, and would honestly be really ambitious in its own right with an interweaving story featuring 6 distinct playable characters. From there, they'd release Sonic Adventure 2, with the Dreamcast's short life being halted as Sonic began to become a third-party title appearing on the systems of what once were competitors, including Nintendo, with Sonic Heroes being their first true multi-platform release. Of course, should I one day make videos on these games, I will dedicate more time to discussing them, but I think it's interesting to note how dominant Sonic once was, before a multiple years-long absence and exclusivity to a troubled if not extremely ambitious console eventually caused Sega's console market to end. In many ways, Sonic the Hedgehog was the glue that held the Mega Drive together, and to this day he remains the primary character and franchise that people think of when they think of Sega. He's not perfect and he has hit many road bumps along the way, but Sonic the Hedgehog will never not have a die-hard fanbase who love him warts and all. And with these 4 games being where it all came from, well, it's really easy to see why.